Just here's some leaves from a sketchbook after classical Roman sculpture that Ottley made, which was bought a couple of years back by the Department of Greece and Rome in the BM. And his skill as a copyist, led him to be employed by a wealthy French scholar resident in Rome, Jean-Baptiste Serrault d'Agincourt, who added him to a team of artists he directed to go around Italy making drawings for the reproductive engravings to illustrate his monumental account of Christian art from late antiquity to its apogee in the Renaissance period of Michelangelo and Raphael. The Histoire de l'art par les monuments, published in 1811, between 1811 and 1823. Unwittingly, Serrault d'Agincourt's desire to demonstrate the corrupted nature of medieval art had the opposite effect, as Otley, along with his fellow copyist, the Dutchman Humbert de Superville, who styled himself Giottino, the Little Giotto, in honor of the Florentine 14th century painter, grew to admire the expressive purity of Italian 13th and 14th century art as they copied in places such as the Basilica of San Francisco in Assisi. This admiration resulted in Otley devising an illustrated publication that would celebrate, quotes, the invention, composition, and expression, as well as the quality of the folding of the draperies of Italian art in these centuries, using a mixture of drawn copies that he and others in the Frenchman's team of copyists had made for the Histoire de l'art. And here's an example of a drawing that he commissioned for Otley's own publication, which was called A Series of Plates Engraved After the Paintings and Sculpture of the Early Florentine School, and on the right-hand side is the print made from it. And this series of plates was published at Otley's expense considerably later in 1826. And as it's rather a rare book, it clearly didn't sell very many copies, which was not good for his finances. The 54 plates in the series of plates begin with a 13th century painting in Perugia by the so-called Master of St. Francis and end with 3 details from Signorelli's Last Judgment frescoes in the Cappella Nova in Orvieto Cathedral from the early 16th century. As Otley knew from his reading of Giorgio Vasari's Lives, Signorelli's chapel in Orvieto presaged the next phase of Italian art, as it was a key source for Michelangelo's Last Judgment, painted 4 decades later in the Sistine Chapel in Rome. Otley's admiration, so here we have a drawing made on site of the left-hand side of the entrance wall, of the entrance arch, and then there's the print that was used for the series of plates. And then Otley's admiration for Signorelli extended to his spare figure drawings in black chalk and charcoal, with 3 of the finest examples in the British Museum traceable to his collection. So here's an example of how the way of detecting an Otley drawing is this drawing doesn't have an Otley mount, but it belonged to Lawrence, and going through the Otley sale catalogue of 1814, there is a description of it, and so it wasn't too difficult to pin it down as that drawing, while in this case we knew that this had been reproduced in the Italian School of Design, so it was certainly a work from Otley's collection. A series of plates is dedicated to the sculptor John Flaxman, whose enthusiasm for the pared-down directness of Italian medieval art was an important catalyst for Otley when the two met in Rome in 1792. During the 2 years before Flaxman's return to England, the two saw each other frequently, with the younger artist copying drawings that Flaxman had made of works he admired during his 7-year stay. And they also travelled out of the city to Orvieto. And here's a drawing that Flaxman made in the British Museum after the 14th century relief by Lorenzo Maitani on the lower right register of the cathedral facade. So there is the work itself. And Otley's drawing of Flaxman, bent over sculpting a clay relief by candlelight, probably dates from these years in Rome. During this period, Flaxman was also creating the outline drawings for engraved illustrations to Homer and Dante. Here are some of them. and Oakley was perhaps the first of many artists across Europe who fell under the spell of their purity of line and bold use of the untouched paper. It has to be admitted that Flaxman's rigour only went so far in Oakley's graphic production. A fierce critic of Oakley's artistic skill was the English painter John Constable, who admired Oakley's human qualities, describing as, quotation, clever writer and a good man, but when shown his drawings over tea in 1824, wrote in his diary, "There was also an abundance of his own things, which gave me a great deal of pain. So laborious, so tasteless, and so useless, but very plausible." In parallel to drawing and studying Italian art during the 1790s, Oakley was also busy building up collections in a variety of fields, which aside from drawings encompassed prints, most notably those documenting the birth of Italian printmaking in goldsmiths' studios through nielli and engravings made after them. So nielli are these little plates where they've been engraved and the lines filled with a black, sort of a sticky black substance. And obviously this is the beginning of Italian printmaking because it was a small step rather than filling those engraved plates with the niello to actually ink them up and then record their designs. So here's an actual niello object, a needle box on the left, and there is the type of print that was made from them. And in addition to these, he also collected paintings and manuscript illuminations from the 14th and 15th centuries that flooded the market as the French army closed down monasteries and churches. And so just to give a sense of the kind of painting that he was buying, well, on the right is one of around 1,000 manuscript illuminations that he had, and some examples from an entire altarpiece by Ugolino de Nerio that's sort of split up around the world. Most of it's in the National Gallery. Closer to home is this work in the MFA, a little portable travelling altarpiece around Duccio, as well as this exquisite painting by Raphael that he bought from the Borghese family. Oakley's private means meant that he was well placed to profit from such unrivaled buying opportunities offered by the French invasion. And it seems from a diary entry of the English landscape painter Joseph Farrington, written in London on October the 9th, 1798, that Oakley was not unsympathetic to the revolutionary spirit of the invading army. So this is the quote from Joseph Farrington. Dupper, which means the painter Richard Dupper, mentioned many proceedings of the French at Rome, and I should apologize to any French person in the room here. They plundered and imposed upon the Italians. They are detested universally, both by the Italians and Germans. Pictures and medals and books, etc., are selling and have been sold cheap indeed. The English artists were to be unmolested according to the proclamation of General Berthier, but have suffered some inconvenience owing to the democratic treachery of Wallace, an English landscape painter. Oakley and Delamain, two other Englishmen, also supported the French cause. This report may well be accurate, since the treacherous George Augustus Wallace was certainly in Oakley's Roman circle, as the two of them visited Naples together in 1796. Oakley's Dutch associate, Humbert de Superville, went so far as to join the French army and was later expelled from the Papal States. A mark of the Dutchman's outspoken character is his description of himself as an atheist. There's bottom left, so it says, Humbert Giottino atheista, anno se, and also the use of the French revolutionary calendar in an allegorical drawing from Oakley's collection, now in the BM. Coincidentally, the best recorded episode in Oakley's collecting of drawings in this period is linked to a Frenchman closely involved in the looting of Italian treasures, the painter Jean-Baptiste Vicard, a long-time Florentine resident who was employed by Napoleon as a commissioner to pick out the best Italian works to be sent back to Paris. Vicar, a former student of the neoclassical painter Jacques-Louis David, was well informed about Italian collections because he was a serious collector of drawings, with perhaps as many as 80 Raphael studies, as well as a number of Michelangelos, perhaps obtained through his friendship with the artist's descendant Filippo Buonarroti. At some point in the latter part of the 1790s, Vicar unwisely entrusted a portion of his drawings for safekeeping to a Florentine friend, who repaid his trust by pretending the 3 cases had been burnt, while in reality selling them off to Ottley in Rome, who shipped them back to England. When Vicar learnt of the theft and Otley's unwitting role in it, he wrote to ask Wallace and Humbert de Superville's aid in recovering them from the Englishmen. Vicar listed 39 stolen works comprising both single sheets and groups of drawings, with the overwhelming proportion of them by Raphael. Otley's reported response is to have admitted buying around 20 Raphael drawings for a large sum, some of which he was willing to return provided he got his money back. How the 2 collectors settled the issue is unknown. Otley certainly retained ex-Vicar Raphael drawings, such as the refined silver point study for the head of the Virgin in the painting now in the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena, as he had no qualms in reproducing some of them in his Italian School of Design, so it is possible that the 2 reached an agreement. The remarkably high percentage of authentic Raphael drawings in Otley and Vicar's collections suggests that both of them had access to a historic holding of them, perhaps at the Antaldi family in Perugia, although there's no evidence to actually support that hypothesis. Whatever their source, the scale and quality of the Raphael drawings that Otley brought back to England, which according to his 1814 sale catalogue numbered 46, were to prove instrumental in ensuring that the BM and the Ashmolean in Oxford are so richly endowed with examples of his graphic corpus. For example, in London, a quarter of the 42 autograph studies by Raphael can be traced back to Otley. And so here's an example of one of them, and there I've written the description of how it was described in the 1814 sale catalogue. Interestingly, he didn't spot that it was based on Michelangelo's David, but instead thought it was after an antique figure, and it was bought by Richard Payne Knight. And then this marvellous double-sided study for Raphael's Parnassus is also from his collection. The publication of very faithful facsimile prints of some of his best Raphael drawings in the School of Design in a chronological sequence with an insightful commentary explaining their relationship and significance to his activities as a painter was a watershed in the scholarship of Raphael, and more generally in the appreciation of how drawings can be studied to illuminate the creative process. To take just one example of Otley's remarkable critical judgment and knowledge, he correctly pinpointed the purpose of the fighting red chalk men in a drawing now at Oxford as a study for a relief in the School of Athens. So here they are, here. But he observed that the fresco admits the foreshortened figure on the ground, and then he adds that the twisting pose of this unused figure might have been Raphael's starting point for the soldier in the expulsion of Heliodorus, painted in the adjoining chamber a few years later. The high quality of Otley's Raphael collection and the effect this had in informing contemporary collectors, most notably Thomas Lawrence, was what to look for in an original work by the artist is also true of the work he acquired by his idol, Michelangelo. The influx of first-rate Michelangelo drawings that Otley introduced to Britain were even more crucial, since the sculptor's authentic drawings as against copies and works by his imitators and followers were in even more short supply than those of Raphael in earlier British collections.